I am Jean-Claude Verrouet. I am pleased to introduce this regional Argentine Malbec tasting guide by 5 of the top world's master sommelier and master of wine. Doug Frost, Rebecca Feynman, Case Golden, Brian Kozial, Evan Goldstein. Each of them will focus on one of the 5 different growing areas from southern region to the northeast region, offering their knowledge. I have been working in Argentina for 8 years. I discovered a great diversity of terroir. Thank you for joining us and please enjoy the tasting.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Buenos dias, buenas tardes, or buenas noches, depending on where you are in the world and what time it is. My name is Evan Goldstein, and I'm a San Francisco-based master sommelier who happens to absolutely adore Argentina, our focus for today. Let's talk about Salta. Salta is an area that sits up in the northwest of the country, along with several other very important provinces, and is a beautiful part of the world and one worth going to for sure, should be on your absolute bucket list of places. The name Salta comes from the word sagta, which is an Indian word in the Aymara language, meaning beautiful one. And once you go to this part of the world, you'll understand it. Salta itself is a bit of a niche area, which is to say it's in the very far north. It takes a long time to get to. And even once you get there, if you fly into the namesake airport in the town of Salta, it takes another 3 hours to get there by car. So you have to be very dedicated and very committed. But once you get there, you'll be really happy that you came. I'd like to talk a little bit now about higher altitude. Grapes are a lot like people, which is to say they like really comfortable temperatures. And your typical grapes that sit at lower altitudes, generally on valley floors, on hillsides, are used to temperatures more like us. The higher you go, the more difficult it gets. Grapes, very much like us, when temperatures get a little bit more difficult and sunlight gets a little bit more direct, they have to protect themselves. Now, you and me, we put on sunglasses and sunscreen. Grapes can't do that. So what grapes will do is basically form thicker skins to protect themselves from the UV rays. As you go up higher and higher, and in the case of Salta, you're at altitude somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 feet. In the case of Altura Maxima, you're going to get much thicker skins. This is good because flavor and color and tannin development in red wines all comes from the thicker skins. Now, you may think that high means hot. And that could be the case in some cases, but high also can mean cool in terms of it gets really, really cool during the evening. We call that thermal amplitude or the diurnal exchange, the difference between the hottest of hot and the coldest of cold temperatures over the span of a day. In the case of a grape, that's really important during the summer months. And here in the area of Salta, you can see upwards to 15 plus degrees Celsius of change between night and day. It's also important to remember that the reason it happens this way is that literally for each 510 feet that you go up in altitude, you lose a degree of Celsius. So it gets cooler and cooler and cooler. So almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit for every 510 feet you go up, which means that those extremes are going to get very extreme. Now you add those high extremes, the high altitude, the thin air, the average amount of different sorts of UV rays that you get at those altitudes that you're not going to get anywhere else, and then throw that into the terroir that is Salta, and you're going to get a pretty unique combination. Now, Salta, I think, before we get into the specifics, should be delineated by the fact that it's very high desert, and it's got a very unique base of soils. You have all sorts of things. You have granites, you have slates, et.cetera., but you have a lot of quartz or pulverized quartz that comes off as mica. And literally during the day, if you look at the vineyards there, the dappled, speckled, it looks almost like diamonds there. And imagine, if you will, a whole load of mini mirrors, like solar farms, reflecting light back up into the vines. And it gives it a really unique situation and gives a high propensity for ripeness in the fruit here. Malbec is not the only grape grown in Salta, but it's a very, very important one. Before anything, let's break down how grapes work out to that part of the world. It's approximately 60% red fruit in Salta and about 40% white fruit. The most important white grape, as many of us know, is Torrontés. And Torrontés, specifically from Salta, Torrontés salteño, is really wonderful, but sort of on the decline in the world as people are changing palates and drinking more and more Malbec and red wines. While there's a lot of Cabernet and other grapes grown, Malbec is without question the calling card across Salta, and I might add, across all of Argentina. Quick spoiler alert. If you are interested in learning more about Argentinian wine in general, there is no better vehicle than Malbec to do it, because if you go from the top of the country up in Salta and Jujuy, Tucumán, Catamarca, etc., and work your way all the way down to Patagonia and go through Mendoza and San Juan and all those places along the way, each time you stop and have a glass of Malbec, it's going to taste distinctively different based on the provenance of where you are. Very few places in the world have that sort of provenance grape variety focus, and Malbec in Argentina is one of those few. So, Malbec in Salta, what's it like? Given the high altitude, given the high diurnal exchange, given the longer growing season that you get with that high diurnal exchange, you can imagine that you have unique characteristics. And for me, the two things that I always am taken by when I have Salta Malbec are, one, the freshness, the brightness, the acidity, the zestiness of the wines, and two, the intensity of the wines, much of which comes from those thicker, darker pigmented skins we talked about before, but also simply because of the intensity of ripeness and a lot of the nature of the factors of development that you get from being at very, very high altitudes. From a personality standpoint, the wines are very different and sort of unique within the whole platform of what Argentina is all about. Here, they tend to be very savory. That is to say, they're not the sort of bigger fruit-forward wines that you would find, say, in La Rioja or in Mendoza, specifically more towards Mendoza City, in Luján de Cuyo, Agrelo, and places like that, where the wines have a juicy succulence fat to them and a richness and a very ripe, almost sweet sense of fruit. Here in Salta, they're very savory. They're much leaner. And if you're trying to make a comparison based on your other Argentinian experiences, then you would probably lean more towards the wines of Uco Valley, which share sort of that leanness and liveness of structure. Here, the fruit character tends to be more restrained. So it's still all about dark plums. It's still all about a lot of those beautiful flavors, the berries and things like that, but you get less of the sort of ripeness and more of the savory elements. Olives are a very important factor here. Florals, but florals coming from herbs. So if you've seen herbs grow in your garden, for example, you know that they pop flowers out at a certain point in time. The fragrance of those flowers, along with the herbs themselves and wildflowers that permeate the entire region of Salta, are going to be much more typical to what you would associate for how the varietal pronounces itself here. It also has a very strong spicy character and a very peppery, sort of somewhere between white and black pepper character that very much delineates the wine and these strong herbal notes. As noted earlier, there were approximately 24 wineries located, or growing people located, more growers than wineries, obviously, in this area of Salta in the upper Calchaquies Valley. One of the areas that I think is worth taking a look for is this new discovery area called Tolombon, which is located further south, somewhere between, Tucumán and as you approach in south of Cafayate proper. Here the vineyards sit at closer to like 6,000 plus feet, and it has a very distinctive microclimate. In Tolombon, there's literally only a couple of producers at this point in time, and one of them is the winery that we're going to be tasting from today, which is Estancia Las Cordones. Now, Estancia Las Cordones, estancia is simply the word for ranch or farm. Los Cordones is the word for the cactuses of the region, which literally grow almost 30 feet high. The winemakers and owners of this winery are an interesting international mix. You have Jeff Mosbach, a good friend of mine, who's an American, Alejandro Sejanovic, whose nickname is Colo being a name for redhead. You see his ginger hair, you'll understand that. And then the local family that own the property, the Saavedra Ascona family, who have been there for a long time. The wines itself, vineyards are approximately 20 years old, 18 at this point in time, having been planted between 2010 and 2011. And the wines, I should say the vines that make this particular Malbec that we're going to be trying, the 2018 vintage, are amongst the highest part of the vineyard itself. Eastern facing slopes, say that 2 times fast, eastern facing slopes at about 6,000 feet. The soils here are very shallow, very rocky, and as I alluded to earlier, a very strong desert type of climate. Lack of water here is a big deal. It's one of the reasons why Salta will always be so niche. Not to say that there's not more plantable areas, but simply not enough water to sustain all those areas. So it's never going to be a big production area, and it's always going to be one for looking forward to. This is a beautiful estancia, and the rocks that are in it are oftentimes slate-based. So you see these slate, large stones, and if you see a picture of the winery, you can look at it, and you'll notice that the stones themselves have these striations there, which over time have been filled out with mica and this decomposed quartz, giving it sort of the look and the appearance of the fur of a tiger, hence the name Tigerstone, which is both the name of the wine, the name of the soil, and if you look at the winery itself, the stones that form the winery proper. This is an area that makes great Malbec. They also make terrific Cabernet, and I've been told there's going to be some wonderful Grenache coming out of there that we'll learn about soon. But let's go ahead and taste the Malbec. The first thing that I note when I smell this is tremendous intensity. The wine really jumps out at you with almost this sort of explosive columnal push. It is quite savory in nature, sort of got a dried plum character, a dried herb character, and some notes of peppers, both like regular peppers, like pasilla peppers or things like that, serrano peppers, but also soft bell peppers as well too. It actually makes you salivate a little bit, which again speaks to the inherent acidity and natural brightness that the wine has, but has this wonderful combination of fruit, minerality, floral characters, and as I said before, this sort of slight savoriness to it. In the palate, the wine has tremendous freshness, got a nice medium body, which belies the fact that the alcohol is actually relatively rich. One of the interesting elements of the modern day school of winemaking up in Salta, which moves away from the school that used to be both, frankly, not in Salta, but all over the country, of these sort of big extracted monster trucks of wines, is both restraint, one, and respect for your terroir, two. So not only does this wine show restraint and elegance at a much higher alcohol level, generous alcohol level, but much more freshness and not as much wood, not as much oak. So there's definitely a veneer of oak on here, which provides some texture, pop some of the spice flavors, but the wine really is all about this sort of stony minerality, this dark savory fruit, and a bright, long finish. What's interesting as well here, the nature of the tannins. Now, the tannins here are present. They definitely grip your palate, but they're more in that sort of powdery, soft side and not necessarily mouth-ripping, which a lot of people are fearful of when they see the dark colors that you find in Tannat. So you don't have to, not Tannat, rather Malbec, I should mean, but I think Tannin, I think Tannat. But really just showing, again, an elegance and a power, which again, I think for a lot of people may be oxymoronic when they think about Salta Malbec, but is definitely going to be true in wines of the region and certainly this delicious wine in my glass. On that note, I hope you've enjoyed our little trip into Salta and the north of Argentina. I bid you good drinking, good eating. Nice to have some empanadas along with your Malbec, and good exploring. Be well, be safe.